Good evening and welcome. Here is today's news wrap and update from the White House and beyond. Today, President Biden and First Lady Dr. Jill Biden returned to the White House after a weekend away at their home, Delaware. Last week, the First Lady Dr. Jill Biden traveled to New York City to participate in various voting awareness events. And on Friday, she joined top American designer to kick off the New York City Fashion Week with a voting awareness event. And today, President Biden hosted disability advocates as well as members of Congress at the White House on the South Lawn to celebrate the anniversary of the signing of the American Disability Act. Tomorrow evening, the president will travel to New York City ahead of the September 11th to participate on Wednesday. The vice president also will travel to New York City tomorrow to participate in the 9/11 commemoration event. And they will also travel, as we've reported last week, they will also travel to Pentagon and Pennsylvania, all those areas where terrorists attacked America on September 11th. So those we will be reporting on those tomorrow. Tomorrow also, Vice President Kamala Harris, who has been in Pittsburgh for the past over the weekend, preparing for tomorrow's debate with the Republican candidate, the former President Donald Trump. Tomorrow they will hold their first debate, national debate broadcast tomorrow in Pennsylvania, and we will report on that, bring you updates on that tomorrow. I'm moving to other region and other story on Africa. The U.S. envoy for Sudan, Tom Perriello, is in the Middle East right now, and he will travel to Egypt, to Saudi Arabia, and Turkey to meet with allies in that area, just to continue, as we reported last month, to continue the conversation and effort, and the U.S.-led effort to end the ongoing war and humanitarian crisis in Sudan. He will also, while he's on the ground in those countries, he will also meet with Sudanese refugees that are in those locations and see how they can continue to work together, again, to bring more awareness to what is going on in Sudan. And speaking of Sudan, the World Health, the Director General of the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros, also traveled to Sudan, to the country, over the weekend to meet with healthcare workers that are on the ground helping with humanitarian aid as well as treating refugees. And he used the opportunity to call again, as leaders have been calling, to call again on the international community, and also urge both sides of the Sudanese army and the RSF, for them to come together to bring an end to these crises that have killed over 20,000 people, and with the famine that is going on in that country, and have displaced many people across the country as well as across neighboring countries. Just to bring more awareness, the U.S. is calling, as well as other international community, and the UN, with the UN General Assembly coming up at the end of this month. We believe that this topic will be a big part of the conversation, not just bringing more awareness and calling on both sides to end this war, and to bring an end to this war and end the humanitarian crisis that we're seeing that we have significant impact for years to come. So the other story that we are focusing on, the election took place in Algeria over the weekend, and the Algeria authority declared President Temporin as the winner, even as his rival said there was an election irregularity. So we will be following that story. Um, at the as we reported last week, the China African Forum took place in Beijing last week, and the Chinese government pledged to invest to provide credit line as well as investment upward of $50 billion over the next 3 years to African countries. And again, as we reported, the U.S. in the past 3 years plus have invested. The data that was released last week showed that the U.S. have invested in the past, since the Biden-Harris administration came on board, have invested over 65 billion dollars in Africa alone. Another story that we are focusing on that we reported, the U.S. Special Envoy for Climate, John Podesta, traveled to China, and that he has concluded his trip. And we wanted to follow up. There is a lot of events in Washington, D.C., and just ahead of the U.S. UN General Assembly and the World Bank meeting that is coming up also next month. So climate is a huge topic that a lot of countries are focusing on, especially providing boosting resources for climate financing for African nations. So today I had an opportunity to speak to some of the young climate advocates from the continent, from Ghana, from Malawi, and from South Africa, regarding what they think, how to provide some recommendation on how the US and China can work together on climate issue relating to Africa. Here is their interview that took place today, earlier this morning, at the Wilson Center. And we want to use this opportunity to thank them for allowing us to do this interview with the Wilson Center fellow. Thank you very much. So here is the interview from earlier today. You're on the ground, working with civil society, working with governments, and you see what is going on, the impact of climate crisis on the continent. So my question to you is, the number one and the number two wealthiest economy, the U.S. and China. The U.S. climate envoy, John Podesta, was traveled to China to meet with his counterpart to talk ahead of the COP29. In preparation for that, what are some of your recommendations on how they can work together to improve some of what is needed on the continent?
Thank you. My name is Kenneth Peju. I'm an activist from Ghana, and my focus is mostly now on forest restoration, carbon market project. And one of the things that I tend to advocate for, particularly with developed countries who tend to support this project, is to consider how to streamline the allocation of these funds with an emphasis on community benefit, because ultimately people in the communities are actually suffering from climate change. I know it's a national issue and mostly it is discussed at the national level, but for any call for financing to come from China or for America, the other important consideration is when these funds arrive, which people tend to benefit. And the best approach is to put in measures and systems to ensure that there's accountability all the way to the community level. And that will translate to, for instance, as you mentioned, food systems, because people in the communities are the farmers. People in the communities are the ones who produce food, the ones who restore forests, the ones who ensure sustainability of these projects. And so we need to find a way to rope them in critically and also have accountability measures for the states who receive these funds from America and China and other developed countries to be able to actually be certain or sure that communities are benefiting and will continue to benefit from financing. And I think that's what this just transition should be about. Those at the grassroots level should not be left behind. That's what I have to say. Thank you.
Okay, my name is Emanuela Dorin Kofi. I'm a lawyer and also a climate activist and a climate negotiator. And I've seen how...
And you're from Ghana.
And I'm from Ghana as well. And on the international forefront, I've seen a lot of these big players, so the U.S. and the China, driving the climate negotiations. But when it comes to conversations about climate finance, it becomes a hardball because everyone is trying to, run away from this responsibility. But I think that one recommendation is really for these two big players because they're the topmost polluters and yet they have the strongest economies in the world. And if we really want to deal with climate mitigation and adaptation, they have a major role to play. Currently, globally, we've seen more climate finance move towards, the mitigation aspect rather than adaptation, which involves, food systems and agriculture, and even just energy transition and the other areas. That is not focused on mitigation, and so I think they have a major role to play. They really need to have the conversation about taking up that responsibility because the whole world is really looking up to them. Some countries would not contribute climate finance if the US and China are not contributing, so they really have a role to play to bring all other developed countries on board in championing these climate mitigation and adaptation projects.
I'm Gloria Machika and I'm an activist from Malawi, and I think the first thing I would say is that it's really healthy competition that is being created right now because you've got two big economies that are competing for the same resources. And I think that puts us in a very unique position as African countries in terms of negotiation and leveraging what needs to be done because more needs to be put in to ensure that they're able to get what they want. So for example, communities need to be safeguarded. We need to be thinking about how communities are actually benefiting, as my colleagues have already mentioned, and you're looking at benefit sharing arrangements in different projects that are happening. And because there's this healthy competition, I think it creates an opportunity for better negotiation, for us to get the longer end of the stick to begin with. So this is coming down to the community. At international level, I think that there's an opportunity for us to rewrite history, to be honest. And that's where we as activists come in to say that we've done things a certain way for a really long time. But here we are, humanity is at a point where it's do or die, right? And we've got no choice about it. And these are two powers that have got the chance to change the world. They've got the chance to make sure that what we have said we'll do as a global community is done. And we've been lobbying in terms of climate financing. I think we've seen very little results in that, and there's been a lot of different ways in which governments are kind of running around it. And we talk about carbon markets, for example. I think an issue has been that is it really translating to what we think it should be translating into in terms of climate financing. But we get to now rethink that and even broaden the amount of resources that are available, not just to African countries, but globally. And so it's a different conversation that we can have. As Emanuela said, I think people like her are in a very unique position right now to say we can actually have access to even more resources and we can make a bigger difference because we have competing interests and we need to come to a point where we agree that this is how we can get there with everybody benefiting.
Hi, my name is Mazi Chushani and I'm an attorney at the Center for Applied Legal Studies. As has been mentioned...
What country?
South Africa.
Okay.
Yes. I think my colleagues have spoken about community benefits, and I think my input would be that, we should really look at these, climate change issues through a gendered lens, thinking about ways in which, women in these various communities are, more adversely, affected by issues of climate change, and looking at different models to ensure that communities benefit, and that, looking at social ownership models of renewable energy, and how, we put women really at the forefront of benefiting from these kind of models, whether it's, trusts that are put in place for communities to be able to be in control of, and not being controlled by other players, but for them to be the decision makers who drive what is happening in their communities. So just to sum it up, I think we should really think about these issues. We say we want to not leave anyone behind, but we should also look at other groups of people who are more adversely affected by issues such as climate change.
Okay. If you have any other thing to add. So my final question to you guys, as I said, you are time compressed. As there are a couple of events that are coming up before COP29. We have the UN, the UNGA, later on this month. We have the IMF and World Bank, which is more of the financial aspect. What is your message? A lot of African leaders will be at the table. And what is your message to this leader as they prepare to go to those events, as well as the U.S. and China?
Okay, so simply, more action, less talk. Increasingly, the world is judging leaders by their actions and not their talk. And so we really need them to walk the talk. We need them to show the commitment beyond the flowery language and the good speeches, and actually go to the ground, get the community members, really feeling the impact of the promises and the commitment that will be made. And I think that would ultimately serve the purpose of all these platforms that are set for world leaders to come together and deliberate on issues of global concern. So simply, they need to work more, and the talk should be matched with the actions.
Okay, you are from the legal profession, so if you can just give us some aspect of that for the upcoming events.
I think that, we have lots of these conventions and legal frameworks concerning climate action, but I think that missing piece in the global space is how can we mainstream climate-related issues in all other fields? And many a times we talk about climate-related issues in silos, but how does climate affect education? How does climate affect sanitation? How does climate affect the economy? And so at the UNGA and all of these, other international platforms, if we can be able to, world leaders can sit down and discuss how climate change affects all of these other areas and how we can mainstream this discussion, and as Mazi said, not leaving anyone behind means bringing people from different areas to be able to have that one conversation and form that network where they can actually drive that change, that in the end they're not leaving anyone behind, because they looked at the gender aspect, they looked at the health aspect, they looked at the education aspect, and they came up with that one possible solution that works for everyone.
Okay.
So that's my message.
So I just to follow up very quickly on that. If I correct, very few African nations have a climate agency or a climate department, am I correct, that deal exclusively with climate issue?
And even climate change laws, legislation.
Okay,
Okay.
yeah,
We have a department. We have a department that's specially dedicated, but yeah, it's.
How effective?
It's just at the same scale. The biggest issue being financing. For you to run a standalone department like that, it requires heavy financing, which we're not necessarily getting because there are also shortcomings in the 100 billion that we're talking about that should be translating to financing for African countries. So those are the challenges, and I think for me, as leaders go in now into discussions, we need to do better by our people. We need to be able to put our foot down and understand that we do have leverage. We need to stop going in there as though, we're at the mercy of one party or the other. We all need each other, and we won't be able to achieve that without the financing needed for it. If we need to run mitigation adaptation projects, if we need to access global funding, it's so hard to access the funds. These projects, the money they say is there, but for a government to even access it, there are requirements that need to be in place. But for those requirements to be met, you also need the financing. So it's a chicken and egg situation, and we need to move away from an expectation that cannot be fulfilled without having first these countries meeting their own obligations and ensuring that we have the capacity, we have the infrastructure, and we have the governance mechanisms to facilitate these processes.
For the lack of repetition, I think my colleagues have also covered me. But I think the message to people who've been assigned to speak on our behalf, they should really do it with that mind of that they're servants, and with the mind of the communities who are really affected by issues in mind. They should do it in a manner that will really be beneficial to them when these conversations are being had. It's a big, and like we've been saying throughout the day, that these are complicated issues, but having that servant-heartedness, I think, should be one of their motivators.
Okay, thank you. And this concludes our news wrap for today. And tomorrow we will bring you more detail and more updates tomorrow. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you tomorrow. I'm Kemi Oshikoya. Have a good evening.